I was reading an article this morning about, it asked the question, will online classes eventually replace the classroom experience entirely? And I think for the big question, will it entirely replace the classroom experience? I don't think anytime soon. Um, but that's like the one extreme, right? Like entirely, like there are certain classes. I took a surveying class where you literally had to go out and measure hills. I don't think that there's an appropriate way to learn that without actually going to the hills and having that equipment and physically doing it. I think it'll be very hard to teach field geology where you go out to the mountains and you pull out sample rocks. I don't think that there's really a way to do those types of things completely online. Then again, those classes aren't really in a physical classroom for the most part anyway. But there are some examples. Chemistry lab, there's a lot of chemicals that are probably best kept safely locked up in a building, and you should probably only use those under close supervision. So I do think that there will always be a place for in-person learning as opposed to online learning. Now, that being said, a lot of what goes on in the classroom is easily replaced and probably improved by moving online. I've taken a lot of online classes, and one of the biggest complaints about online classes is that students don't get enough one-on-one attention from the teacher. Now, in a lot of my online classes, I had a weekly call scheduled, and I would be actively engaged way more than I would in a big lecture hall. So I don't think that argument holds very much weight, because we communicate online all the time with our families, with our closest friends. My mom, my dad, my sister, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, most of them live 2,000 miles away. So I don't think having a professor that lives 2,000 miles away is that big of a deal. I've worked with a lot of kids in Clark County School District where they're learning online in the classroom anyway. It's weird. I have students who their entire class time, they're sitting at the computer doing work online, and the teacher's there to sort of, walk back and forth between the rows and see if they have any questions. Something like that kind of takes the value out of having the physical classroom in the first place, because if all the kids are just working online, then why do they need to be in the building? Why are you paying to air condition and all that, and why are you putting the kids in a structure, having them work at a time that might not be their ideal time to do math? I had students that I worked with that were in that kind of setup that were like crazily behind, in danger of not making it through the year. And I worked with them at night, and they did just fine. I mean, we did a lot of work cooperatively. I would help them through the problems. I would sit there at the computer the whole time with them, and they would do the problems they could. The ones they couldn't, I did. And I explained to them step by step, and I made sure that they could explain it back to me. And we actually had a lot of success in that format, to where one student in particular actually got like way ahead of the rest of his class from being way behind, just because. And not a lot changed. He was still sitting at the computer. Instead of having the teacher walking back and forth during the day, it was me sitting next to him, and granted, the ratio was a lot better. It was me and him, one-on-one, instead of a teacher with 30 students. So I appreciate the struggle that a lot of these teachers go through, having so many students, that how can you provide them personalized attention? But the format was very similar. We were in his home, so he was able to eat a hot dog, eat a grilled cheese while he was doing it, in a lot more comfortable environment. And some people's internal clocks are just better at night. Some people just are wired to be more productive at certain hours of the day, and he was, I didn't get to see him in the middle of the day because that's when he was in his classroom, but at night he seemed to be perfectly productive, and he just needed some instruction. And that's the main reason for the physical classroom, is that you can personally work with the student and give them that face-to-face instruction. Now, if the physical classrooms are going to phase that out and just rely on computers anyway, then absolutely those kinds of classes can be replaced by online classes. In fact, I haven't run the numbers, but it might be more cost effective to give each student one person to work with them for a couple hours rather than paying for the whole building maintenance and all the overhead to get them all together in a room and have one teacher walk around. I don't know which is necessarily cheaper, but it's certainly more effective having one person working with that student for a shorter period of time, but focus on them individually. Another area where a lot of classes, in-person classes, could be replaced by online ones are the big lecture halls. And even at the elementary and high school level, there's a lot of lecture-style classes in history and things of that nature where the teacher's just up front giving a speech. There's no reason that speech can't be recorded. I've made many online classes by now, actually, and recorded them, and they're there for posterity. And I'm happy to respond if anyone has questions to those videos. But it's a huge time saver to record it once, a huge time saver. And most of you guys have been in a physical classroom, right? Sitting at those desks or sitting in those lecture halls, not the most engaging place to be. I've fallen asleep. I've literally fallen asleep in the front row of a class where I was good friends with the professor, and I've had him have Tim wake up. He knew me by name in a class of 500 people probably, and I fell asleep there. And kids at their desks, they can fall asleep. Whereas if I'm watching a video online on my time, I'm usually going to pick a time when I can pay attention to it, or I might play it several times throughout the day in the background while I'm going to sleep, while I'm playing video games. That's one way I've hacked my life to get through a lot of school and still enjoy life, is I'll play a lot of those recorded lectures while I'm doing something, and I'll just repeat the same lecture over and over again, and it doesn't take that long. In an 8-hour day, you can listen to a 1-hour lecture quite a few times and still cook and clean and eat and play games and play with the cats and do all kinds of stuff, and it's repeating and it's repeating. So when you hear the lecture the third time, you're picking up on things that you hadn't heard before. And that's so much better than physically being there once and falling asleep in your desk. So anything lecture-based, I would say the online format is preferable. Not just an acceptable substitute, but I would say actually preferable. You can always email the person, right? It's not that hard. I've had students email me. It's not that big a deal to email someone if you're engaged, but the ability to watch and repeat and listen and repeat by far trumps the physically being in the room. So for a lot of classes, online is actually better. Not all classes. Again, chemistry lab, field geology, those types of things you have to do in person in the field. And I do think that for most math, you're going to want someone physically there to explain it to you. But a lot of physical in-person math classes aren't set up to have that person explain it to you anyway. So it's really a trade-off, and I think rather than saying online or in person, this false dichotomy, I think we should look at what's the most effective way to teach each particular class and work on it at a class-by-class basis rather than trying to create these systems and these ideologies that there's no reason to exist on. I think online's better, I think in person's better. It depends. It depends on the class. If I'm getting surgery, I want a doctor that's physically dissected something in person. But if I want someone to understand a talk that I give, I think that the ability for them to listen to the recording a dozen times beats being in person in the room 10 times out of 10. So that's my take on it. What are your thoughts on online classes?